The bathroom door clicked open, and the steam spilled out before Brenda did. I glanced up from tying my pajama pants. Standard Saturday night drill. TV in bed. Maybe order takeout. But even before I really looked at her, something felt off. Like a chord slightly out of tune in a familiar song. She moved to her side of the closet, humming something I didn't recognize, and that's when I saw it properly. Her dress. Not the one she'd worn out to brunch with her girlfriends earlier. No, this was different. A silky black thing with thin straps, something she usually kept for nights out with me. It was thrown over a hanger like she'd just peeled it off, and it was inside out. Inside out. That was weird, right? Brenda was meticulous. Everything in her closet faced the same way, color-coordinated, practically breathing in alphabetical order. My fingers tightened on the drawstring of my pajamas. "Thought you were meeting Sarah and Chloe today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, casual. Like I hadn't just felt a tiny icy finger trace its way down my spine. She turned, a towel still wrapped around her hair, and smiled. A bright, maybe too bright smile. "Yeah, brunch. Then we did a little shopping. You know, girly stuff." She moved past me towards the dresser, her bare shoulders gleaming in the soft bedside lamp. "Shopping. Okay. But why the dress? An inside-out, new dress for tonight?" I asked, nodding towards the black silk hanging in the open closet. She glanced back, her movements a little too quick, too breezy. "Oh, that old thing. Just airing it out. Needed to breathe." She laughed a little, a short, breathy sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Breathe. Dresses don't breathe." And Brenda never aired out clothes by leaving them inside out in the closet. She'd dry clean something delicate, or maybe hang it on the balcony for a few minutes. But this felt staged. Like an excuse thrown together in a heartbeat. My heart started a slow, heavy thump against my ribs. I watched her as she opened her jewelry box, the small clinking sounds suddenly amplified in the quiet room. Her fingers hovered over her necklaces, but she wasn't really looking. She was, distracted? Fidgety? "Everything all right?" I asked again, the casual tone cracking a little this time, letting a sliver of real worry seep in. She finally looked at me, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. "Yeah, fine. Why wouldn't it be?" Her eyes were a little too bright, pupils a little too dilated. Like she was nervous? Nervous about what? "Brunch with Sarah and Chloe?" My gaze drifted back to the dress. Inside out. Silky black. Not the clothes for a casual Saturday brunch. And definitely not aired out. It was like the dress itself was whispering something to me. A dark, slithering secret hidden in the folds of the fabric. And her eyes, too bright, her smile too forced. Suddenly, the silence in the room felt deafening, and Brenda's quick, flimsy explanations hung in the air, thinner than smoke. Something was definitely wrong. And I had a sickening feeling I was about to find out exactly what. The breathe excuse hung in the air between us, as flimsy as a cobweb. My mind was racing, each thought a frantic hummingbird trapped in my skull. Asterisk airing out? Inside out. Black silk. Asterisk it didn't add up. None of it. And her eyes. Those bright, wide, too alert eyes. They were screaming louder than any accusation I could have voiced. "Just tired," I mumbled, turning away, pretending to rummage for the remote on the bedside table. Long week. Lame. Pathetic, even. But I needed to buy time, to think, to breathe myself. My own breath felt tight in my chest, like my lungs had suddenly shrunk. She nodded, too quickly again, and disappeared into the bathroom, the water turning on almost immediately. Showers. People take showers to wash things away. Sweat, dirt, guilt? The thought hit me like a physical blow. Guilt. My eyes flicked to her purse, tossed carelessly on the chair by the door. Usually, Brenda was meticulous about her purse too. Always hung in the closet, everything in its place. But tonight it was just there. A dark leather lump on the pale fabric of the chair. My heart hammered. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like an invisible force was pulling me towards it, a morbid curiosity laced with dread. I told myself it was just to reassure myself. To prove to myself I was being ridiculous, paranoid. I walked over to the chair, my steps feeling heavy, deliberate, like each one was a step further into forbidden territory. I picked up her purse. It was surprisingly light. I unzipped the main compartment. Wallet, keys, lipstick, the usual. Then, tucked into a side pocket, I saw it. Her phone. The sleek, obsidian rectangle, face down. She usually kept it on her, or charging on her nightstand. Never just abandoned in her purse. Especially not on silent, which I could see from the little icon on the side. Silent. Deliberately silent. My hands were shaking now, a tremor that started deep in my bones and radiated outwards. This was wrong. So wrong. But I couldn't stop. My thumb hovered over the power button. Just a peek. Just to confirm my fears were baseless. Or more likely to confirm they weren't. I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. No passcode. Brenda always had a passcode. Always. Unless she'd turned it off. Deliberately. To what? To hide something. My breath hitched in my throat. My fingers, clumsy and trembling, swiped across the screen. Messages. The green icon of her messaging app winked at me. I tapped it. And there it was. A thread of messages. Just one. At the very top of the list. Unsaved number. Just a series of digits. And the name. Jake. Just Jake. No last name. No contact photo. Just Jake. My finger hovered over the name. I could stop now. Close the phone. Pretend I hadn't seen anything. Live in blissful ignorance. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to see. I tapped Jake. The message thread opened. And my world tilted. The last few messages were innocuous enough. Had fun today. Smiley face from Brenda. Me too. Thinking of you now, from Jake. A few emojis. Harmless. Almost. Except for the timestamps. Earlier today. During her brunch with Sarah and Chloe. My stomach dropped. But it was what scrolled up above those messages that stole the air from my lungs and left me gasping. Photos. Dozens of them. Brenda. Smiling. Laughing. Looking different. Happier. More alive. Than she had looked with me in months. And in every single photo, there was a man. Jake. I didn't recognize him. Dark hair, easy smile, an arm casually draped around Brenda's shoulders. In one photo they were kissing. Not a quick peck. A real kiss. Passionate. Lingering. A kiss that made my blood run cold. Another photo. Brenda. In that black silk dress. The inside-out dress. Smiling at the camera, Jake's hand resting possessively on her hip. The background. A hotel room. A plush, anonymous hotel room. My vision blurred. The phone slipped in my trembling hand, landing softly on the carpet. My legs felt weak, suddenly unable to support my weight. I sank onto the edge of the chair, the leather cold against my skin. Betrayal. The word echoed in my head, a hollow, deafening sound. Betrayal. It wasn't just the dress. It wasn't just the silence. It was this. These photos. This. Jake. The shower was still running in the bathroom. Brenda would be out soon. And I was here, sitting on the edge of a chair, her phone on the floor, my world shattered into a million tiny, jagged pieces. What was I going to do? How could I face her? How could I pretend everything was normal, when everything had just exploded. I picked up the phone again, my fingers numb. I had to do something. Say something. But the words were stuck in my throat, choked by a sudden, overwhelming wave of grief, anger, pain. It was all of them, a toxic cocktail swirling inside me. I stared at the last photo on the screen. Brenda and Jake, laughing, sunlight streaming through a window, illuminating their faces. They looked happy, unburdened, free. And I was outside the frame, invisible, irrelevant. The silence in the room was no longer just deafening. It was suffocating. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that my life was about to change forever. The water stopped running. Silence descended again, thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart. I could hear Brenda moving around in the bathroom, the rustle of fabric, the faint click of drawers closing. Every sound was amplified, distorted, imbued with a new, sinister meaning. Then the door opened. Brenda stood there, wrapped in her robe, her hair still damp, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of her usual lavender shower gel drifting towards me. She looked normal, beautiful, even. The same Brenda I'd woken up next to this morning, the same Brenda I'd shared breakfast with, the same Brenda I thought I knew. And that was the most sickening part of all. The normalcy. The facade. She smiled, a softer, more genuine smile this time, but it didn't reach her eyes either. "Hey," she said, her voice slightly muffled by the towel still draped around her neck. "Everything okay? You looked a little zoned out." Zoned out. My world had just imploded, and she thought I looked zoned out? The irony was so sharp it was almost comical. Almost. I stood up slowly, the phone still clutched in my hand, hidden against my thigh. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move, to stand in front of her, to look her in the eyes. Those bright, too bright eyes that were now trying to appear innocent, concerned. "Brenda," I said, my voice sounding rough, unfamiliar even to myself. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, just a fraction, but enough for me to see. A flicker of something. Not fear, not yet. But a wariness, a subtle tightening around her eyes. She sensed something was off. She just didn't know how much. "Talk," she repeated, tilting her head slightly. "About what? Is something wrong with dinner?" I was thinking of ordering Thai. She was thinking about Thai food. While I was standing here, reeling from the images of her kissing another man, of her in a hotel room, wearing that dress. The disconnect was surreal. "Forget dinner, Brenda," I said, my voice hardening, the casual tone gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. "Forget dinner. Let's talk about today. Your brunch with Sarah and Chloe." Her eyes widened slightly. "Yeah. What about it?" She was still trying to play it cool, but I could see the first real hint of nervousness creeping in now. Her fingers fidgeted with the belt of her robe. "Did you have fun?" I asked, the question laced with a sarcasm so thick it was almost venomous. "Yeah, it was nice," she stammered, her gaze darting away for a split second, then snapping back to mine, too quickly, too forcefully. We went to that new place downtown. The one Sarah was telling me about." "Downtown," I repeated, my voice dangerously soft now. "Really? Downtown? That's interesting. Because Brenda, I'm starting to think your brunch wasn't quite what you said it was." Her breath hitched audibly this time. Her eyes, those bright, wide eyes, finally started to betray her. Fear. It was there now, unmistakable, growing, spreading like a stain in her pupils. What are you talking about, Colton?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, the color draining from her face. She took a step back, instinctively creating distance between us. Like she knew, somehow, that the space between us was about to become a chasm. I didn't say anything. I just held out my hand, palm up, the phone still hidden, but the gesture clear. Her phone. I wanted her phone. I wanted to see if she would lie. If she would try to deny it. She froze. Her eyes flicked down to my hand, then back up to my face, panic flickering in their depths. She knew. She knew I knew. The pretense, the charade, it all crumbled, leaving her exposed, vulnerable. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached into the pocket of her robe. Her fingers brushed against something. Not her phone. She pulled out her keys. Keys to the house. A pathetic, clumsy attempt at misdirection. My keys, she stammered, her voice trembling now, barely a whisper. You want my keys? I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just kept my hand extended, my gaze locked on hers. I was a statue of accusation, a silent judge, waiting for her confession. The keys rattled in her trembling hand. She knew it was over. She knew the game was up. And in that moment I saw it. Not just fear, but desperation. Desperation and shame. A deep, raw shame that finally broke through the carefully constructed facade. She dropped her gaze, the fight draining out of her, her shoulders slumping. She knew denial was pointless. She was caught. And she knew I knew everything. With a slow, defeated movement, she reached into the other pocket of her robe. This time, she pulled out her phone. Her hand shook as she placed it in mine. No passcode. She hadn't even bothered to turn it back on. The screen was dark, blank, a mirror reflecting her own pallid, stricken face. I didn't need to look at the phone again. I'd seen enough. More than enough. The images were burned into my brain, seared onto my soul. The black dress, the hotel room, Jake's arm around her, that kiss. I looked up at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd come out of the bathroom. And I saw it. The truth. Etched in the lines around her eyes, in the tremor of her lips, in the defeated slump of her body. Her clothes hadn't betrayed her. She had betrayed herself. And her silence was now deafening with confession. Pack your things, Brenda, I said, the words flat, emotionless, devoid of anger, devoid of everything but a bone-deep weariness. Just pack your things and go. Her eyes snapped up to mine, wide, pleading. Tears welled, spilling over and tracing tracks down her pale cheeks. Colton, please, she choked out, her voice thick with sobs. Please. Let me explain. Explain. Explain what? The photos? The lies? The betrayal? What explanation could possibly justify what she'd done? There's nothing to explain, Brenda, I said, my voice still flat, still cold. I saw everything. Just go. She stood there, frozen, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with silent sobs. But she didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't deny. She just stood there, broken, defeated. And in that moment, looking at her, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not anymore. Just a profound, aching emptiness. The pain was so deep, so raw, it was almost numb. Go, Brenda, I repeated, turning away, unable to look at her anymore, unable to bear the sight of her tears, unable to feel anything but this vast, desolate emptiness. Please, just go. And I walked out of the bedroom, leaving her standing there, alone, with her shame, her secrets, and the ruins of our life together. The click of the bedroom door closing behind me echoed in the sudden, hollow silence of the apartment, a final, brutal punctuation mark to everything we had been. The bedroom door clicked shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sudden vacuum of the apartment. I stood there for a moment, rooted to the spot, listening to the silence. A silence so profound it was almost a physical presence, pressing in on me, suffocating me. It was the silence of absence, the silence of a life being abruptly, violently, erased. Then I moved. Almost mechanically, like a robot running on pre-programmed instructions. I walked back into the bedroom. It was empty. Brenda was gone. Just like that. 1 minute she was there, her robe still tied, tears on her face, The next, vanished. Like smoke in the wind. My gaze drifted to the closet. The black dress was still there, inside out, mocking me with its silent accusation. Her clothes betrayed her. No, her choices had betrayed us both. The dress was just a symptom, a visual manifestation of something rotten that had been festering beneath the surface for who knew how long. I walked over to the bed and sat down heavily, the mattress dipping under my weight. It still held the faint warmth of her body, a ghost of her presence lingering in the fabric. I stared at the opposite side of the bed, at her nightstand, at the empty space where her perfume bottles used to stand, where her books used to be piled. Gone. All gone. An emptiness yawned inside me, a vast, echoing void that seemed to swallow everything whole. It wasn't just sadness. It was something deeper, colder. A hollow ache that spread through my chest, making it hard to breathe. It was the absence of something vital, something essential, ripped away without warning, leaving a gaping wound that throbbed with a dull, persistent pain. Anger flickered, a brief, hot flare in the cold emptiness. Anger at Brenda. At her lies, her deceit, her betrayal. At Jake, whoever the hell Jake was, for waltzing into our lives and stealing my wife, my life. But the anger was quickly extinguished by a wave of exhaustion, of profound weariness. It was too much effort to be angry. The emptiness was easier, in a strange, perverse way. I leaned back against the headboard, closing my eyes, trying to shut out the images that were still flashing behind my eyelids. Brenda's smiling face in those photos, that kiss, the black dress in the hotel room. Each image a fresh stab wound in my already bleeding heart. Self-doubt crept in, insidious and unwelcome. Had I been blind? Had I missed the signs? Was I not enough? The questions swirled in my mind, relentless and accusatory. I replayed moments from the past months, searching for clues, for hints of dissatisfaction, for anything I might have overlooked. The late nights she claimed were work-related, the weekends she was tired, the subtle distance that had grown between us. Were those signs? Or was I just grasping at straws, trying to make sense of the senseless? I thought back to the early days of our relationship, the whirlwind romance, the laughter, the easy intimacy. We had been so happy, so in love. What had gone wrong? Where had we lost our way? Was it something I had done? Something I hadn't done? Had I become complacent? Boring? Had I failed her somehow? Regret washed over me, a bitter, corrosive tide. Regret for the lost years, for the shattered dreams, for the future that would never be. We had built a life together, brick by painstaking brick, and now it was all reduced to rubble, scattered by her infidelity, by her lies. And for what? For some fleeting, meaningless affair with a stranger named Jake? The weight of it all pressed down on me, crushing me. The weight of the betrayal, the loss, the uncertainty of the future. My chest ached, my head throbbed, my body felt heavy, leaden, incapable of movement. I sat there for what felt like hours, lost in the labyrinth of my own grief, my own pain. The apartment was silent, still, holding its breath, waiting. Waiting for me to break, to shatter completely. Then, slowly, imperceptibly, something shifted. A tiny crack appeared in the wall of emptiness surrounding me. A faint glimmer of, not hope, not yet, but something akin to acceptance. A grudging acknowledgement of the reality of the situation. Brenda was gone. Our marriage was over. And there was nothing I could do to change it. The pain was still there, a dull, throbbing ache, but it felt different. Less raw, less immediate. More like a deep bruise, something that would take time to heal, but something that could heal, eventually. I stood up, my legs stiff and aching, and walked to the window. The city stretched out before me, a vast, indifferent expanse of lights and shadows. Life went on, oblivious to the personal earthquake that had just ripped through my world. I took a deep breath, the air cool and sharp in my lungs. It was a small breath, a shaky breath, but it was a breath nonetheless. And in that breath, I felt a flicker of something else, something nascent and fragile, but undeniably present. A flicker of resolve? A tiny spark of survival? I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know how I was going to navigate this new, desolate landscape of my life. The emotional scars were deep, and I knew they would ache for a long time to come. Anxiety still gnawed at the edges of my composure, a low hum of uncertainty that vibrated through my bones. But beneath the pain, beneath the emptiness, beneath the fear, there was something else stirring. A quiet, stubborn refusal to be broken. A nascent determination to what? To survive. To rebuild? To find a way forward, somehow, in this shattered world? I didn't know yet. But the silence in the apartment, though still heavy, no longer felt quite so suffocating. It felt different. Less like a tomb, more like a blank page. And for the first time since I'd seen those photos, a tiny, fragile tendril of something that might, just might, eventually blossom into hope, began to unfurl in the desolate landscape of my heart. The night was still young, the silence still deep, but the crushing weight had lifted just enough to let me breathe. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin with. The morning after Brenda left, the silence in the apartment felt different. It wasn't heavy, suffocating anymore. It was empty, clean, like a freshly swept room, devoid of clutter, but also devoid of warmth. I woke up with a dull ache behind my eyes and a sense of purpose. A grim, practical purpose. It was time to deal with the wreckage. First things first, divorce. The word tasted like ash in my mouth, but it was necessary. Dragging things out, clinging to false hope, that wasn't me. I called a lawyer, a brisk, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies whose number a friend had given me, and made an appointment for that afternoon. Then, my fingers trembling slightly, I logged into our joint bank account. Our account. It felt strange even thinking of it that way now. With a few clicks, I froze the account, ensuring Brenda wouldn't drain it dry in a fit of anger or desperation. It was a cold, calculated move, but necessary. I needed to protect myself, to take control of what little control I had left. Ms. Davies was efficient and direct. Divorce papers would be filed by the end of the week. She asked about assets, about Brenda's potential reaction, about my desired outcome. I answered her questions in a monotone, feeling strangely detached, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. Leaving her office, armed with a stack of papers and a sinking feeling in my stomach, I knew there was no turning back. This was real. This was the end. That evening, I called Mark and David, my two closest friends. It had been too long since we'd properly hung out, life and marriage and work having conspired to whittle down our friendships to sporadic texts and rushed phone calls. "Guys," I said, my voice still rough around the edges, "beers? Tonight. My place." They were there within the hour, armed with beer and pizza and an unspoken understanding of what had happened. We didn't talk about Brenda, not directly. We talked about sports, about work, about stupid memories from college, about everything and nothing. It was exactly what I needed. The easy camaraderie, the familiar jokes, the simple presence of friends who knew me, who understood me, without needing a lengthy explanation. For the first time in days, I laughed. A real laugh, not a hollow imitation. It felt rusty, unfamiliar, but incredibly liberating. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork, logistical rearrangements, and a slow, gradual reclaiming of my own space, both physical and emotional. I started going back to the gym regularly, rediscovering the physical release of pushing my body, the focused energy of lifting weights. I dusted off my old guitar, the one that had been gathering dust in the corner of the living room for years, and started strumming chords again, clumsy at first, then gradually regaining my muscle memory, my calluses returning to my fingertips. Music, once a central part of my life, a passion I had let fade into the background, was slowly coming back into focus. The apartment itself began to change. Brenda's things were gone, packed up and sent to her sister's address. a silent, efficient exchange orchestrated by Ms. Davies. The apartment felt lighter, less cluttered, and strangely, liberatingly, mine. I replaced the pastel throw pillows Brenda had chosen with darker, more masculine ones. I rearranged the furniture, creating a more open, less fussy layout. I hung some of my old band posters back up on the walls, the vibrant colors and bold designs injecting a dose of my personality back into the space. Little by little, the apartment was transforming from our place back into my place. It was a subtle shift, a gradual evolution, but each change felt like a small act of reclaiming myself, of rebuilding my identity piece by piece. One evening, weeks after she'd left, I found myself sitting on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. I was alone, the silence around me comfortable, not oppressive. I was sipping a beer, listening to some old blues on my headphones, just being. And as I watched the colors deepen and fade, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I thought about Brenda. Not with anger, not with bitterness, not even with sadness, not really. Just with a quiet understanding. What we had had was over. It was painful, yes. Deeply, profoundly painful. But it was also done. Finished. And in that finality, there was a strange kind of liberation. Betrayal had shattered my world, yes. It had ripped apart the life I thought I had, the future I had envisioned. But in the wreckage, something new was beginning to emerge. Something raw, something fragile, but something undeniably hopeful. The end of a chapter, yes. But also, undeniably, the beginning of a new one. A chapter one hadn't planned, a chapter one hadn't asked for, but a chapter nonetheless. And for the first time since all of this had started, I felt a flicker of genuine excitement about turning the page and seeing what that new chapter might hold. The emotional scars would remain, I knew that. They were etched deep, and they would likely ache for a long time. But scars, I realized, were also proof of healing. Proof of survival. And looking out at the city lights twinkling in the twilight, I understood, with a quiet certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I would survive. I would heal. And I would rebuild. Not the life I had lost, but a new life, a different life, a life that was entirely, unapologetically, my own. The silence of the evening was no longer deafening, no longer suffocating. It was pregnant with possibility. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free to grieve, free to heal, free to begin again. And in that freedom, in that quiet, resolute determination, lay the unexpected, hard-won promise of a new dawn.